On today's show, I am joined by fan favorite Tyler Jones for part one of a two-part conversation about all things Hawks in advance of a huge summer for the team. And here we go with part one.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1717 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday here in mid-May, and plenty to get to on today's podcast. I am joined by my friend Tyler Jones for part one of two. So if you're listening to this podcast, part two should be available in your podcast feed of choosing right now as soon as this show ends, so stay tuned for that. Also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, make us your first to listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to the Locked On Hawks podcast anywhere you might find podcasts. That includes Overcast, that includes Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and we're also on YouTube on the video side. As a PSA, I recorded this with Tyler on Tuesday evening. Really not a lot has changed across the board. Not a ton of new rumor stuff. The combine's been ongoing, but we'll get into some of that stuff later on. But that's just a little bit of a PSA for all of you. And I should also plug at the top of this show, it's been very, very busy on this podcast feed in the last few days for obvious reasons. The Hawks won the lottery on Sunday afternoon. I did an emergency podcast right away. I did a two-part episode on Monday with Brian Schroeder, an NBA draft expert. We talked about all kinds of stuff about the draft on that show. And then I also did a mailbag podcast on Tuesday into Wednesday, answer your questions on Alex Sarr and Trae Young, number one pick options, all that stuff. And there is so much more to come. So go ahead and subscribe. Please join us for the future. It's been very busy already. It's going to be very, very busy from now to the draft and beyond. So all that said, no more further delay. We'll dive in right now with my friend Tyler Jones and I. This is part one of two. It's coming to you. Here we go. I am joined once again by my friend Tyler Jones. Tyler, the lottery happened. The Hawks won the lottery. Welcome back.
They won the lottery.
They sure did.
Which it was all right. So, like, I don't know if you guys know, or people were listening. We were on Spaces on X. You know, we used to call it Twitter, but things
I still do. It's Twitter, is what it is. But yeah,
people on the Spaces, and I was like, wow, the Hawks finally won something. And like legitimately, in my Hawks fandom, I've been a Hawks fan for more or less since 2004, pretty much. This is the first time they've ever won anything. I mean, like, you know, they've never made it to Eastern. You know, they only made it to Eastern Conference Finals twice now.
Twice.
So they've won playoff series, but they haven't won no championships. And then in the lottery every year, it's always they were one number short. I still remember the Dwight Howard draft. Where because that's where I was like, oh yeah, the Hawks trashed that year. They're gonna get Dwight Howard, Atlanta. Let's go. They might get Josh Smith as well. They got the other pick. I'm like, I'm gonna be the fan of the Hawks. Let's do it. Man, they got 6. Just so Pistons fans like set aside. I know where y'all coming from. 3 straight years.
No. They already won the lottery though. They won the lottery already.
That's what I'm saying. Like they've won the lottery before.
They won the lottery, and they
won the lottery and titles. Like, you know, it's time for the love to be spread. So it's good that the Hawks actually won something for the first time. And overall, I think it's a great thing for like just step back a bit. Like I was saying on that Spaces, and I'll bring it up here. Like this just gives the Hawks like just options and an opportunity to really push the franchise forward in a way that they haven't been able to since the Eastern Conference Finals run. So we're going to get into a lot of what's going on, but I guess I'm going to let you ask me the question, Brad, since it's your podcast, and we can go from there.
I was waiting on Falcons talk there. We didn't do it. That's okay. That's how That's how people who listen to the podcast will know that there's a lot to talk about when we're not leading with the Falcons.
There is a lot
in brief fashion.
Okay.
I was gonna ask you your reaction to winning the lottery, but we just covered that. I felt bad afterwards because we were on that space and I was on Twitter and ahead. So I actually technically broke the news to anyone listening to the spaces because I was ahead of the TV. But I was just like, well, they won. I was like, well, I have to podcast and all this stuff. It was interesting. No, I have to say, look, my fandom is not the same. I've said it many times. Like, I cover the team now. It's not as emotional for me, but like, it's still like, whoa, the Hawks won the lottery. Even when
the lottery.
Even when they went to the top 4, I was like, wow, that's really interesting that they're in the top 4. Like, not thinking really still at that point ever that they were going to win it. It was like, oh, they'll be 3 or 4. That'd be cool. They'll have a chance at some guys they weren't going to have a chance at before. Oh, they won it. So you said something to me offline, maybe even on Twitter too, but there's been a lot of talk. I talked about this with Brian Schroeder too this week about like the jokes are easy to write. And look, I don't blame anybody for saying that about the Hawks winning this lottery in particular. That joke's been out there. I don't blame it. I would have probably said the same thing. I'm sure I retweeted somebody saying the same thing. It is funny through that lens because there isn't the guy, but Brian said the same thing. I think that you think like it's still a pretty interesting lottery and a good time for the Hawks to win this. Like you always want to win it.
Yeah.
It goes without saying that you want to win it. I think I've seen some truly terrible takes. Like, wouldn't you rather not win it this year? Like, no. Like, yes, it costs more money. Cool. It does cost more money, whatever. But you still want to win the lottery. You want to win it. It gives you decision-making power is what I would say about it. Like, you have free reign. And, yeah, there's no Wemby. I get it. Alex Sarr is the guy everybody likes. We'll talk about him, too, in a second. But what do you make of that idea? And because, look, we'll preview the summer a little bit here because we're going to get into it anyway. But I feel like having the number 1 pick, it shines a light on the team for better and for worse. Sometimes light can be an enlightening thing. I don't mean to say that in that sort of parallel way, but there's been a lot of frustration from diehards about like the lack of organizational direction the Hawks have had the last couple of years. And we talked about it a lot on the show. There hasn't been a plan, it doesn't seem like, or at least not a coherent one. And now there's nowhere to run and hide. Like this is the first time in a long time, I think since the conference finals run, really, that the national spotlight is actually on the Hawks in a way that it really hardly ever is. So like, what does that all mean to you? Because it's obviously going to be a huge summer. I mean, we all kind of want to know that, but it's a massive swing of an offseason, no matter what happens, whether it's trades or the pick and all that put together. Like it's going to be a huge time for them to potentially pivot or potentially augment or whatever, because you went from a couple maddening seasons in a row to you already had changes on the horizon, we thought, and then it's like, oh, by the way, number 1 pick on top of that. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors and passion, drive, and patience are the formula for winning championships. That's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up as well to peak performance. They have roof racks, they have superchargers, they have exhaust kits, LED headlights, and much, much more. Whether you're actually into power or speed or style, eBay Motors has got you covered across the board for your vehicle. They have over 122 million parts for your number 1 ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for with the folks at eBay Motors. And they have eBay's guaranteed fit, which means your part is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money is coming back to you. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and you are never, never, never burning any cash. With all the parts that you need at the price that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win that you are seeking. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go and visit is ebaymotors.com. eBay guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Yeah, so I like the way you put it. It shines a light on the organization. Like people will look in, and one of the first things a lot of people who really haven't been paying attention to the Hawks are going to look and be like, okay, why hasn't this team been winning? What's wrong with them? Why were they in the lottery? Like weren't they just in the Eastern Conference Finals? Was that a fluke? Was that not? And like overall, the first thing they're going to notice is like, man, wrestler sure does not want to pay the tax. Like that is the first thing, right? Where it's like, wait a minute. They traded 2 proven starters who went on to other teams who weren't terrible. Kevin Huerter went to the Kings. Kings made a playoff run, and they were in the play-on. John Collins went to the Jazz. He had a rough start. He got his footing. He ended the season strong on a team like the Hawks. The Hawks were better, but not by much this past season. And he was still an everyday starter contributor for, not a sub, like we're not talking about a sub 20 team, basketball team with what John Collins did. And he put up John Collins numbers. And so it's one of those things where it's like, wait, they traded those 2 guys for nothing. Like they have nothing to show for it right now from their Eastern Conference Finals run. But instead they started the entire season with Saddiq Bey and DeAndre Hunter as their primary forwards or forwards, wings, however you want to designate them. And then people are going to be like, what? Are either of them in the top 200? Like in terms of like players in the league?
They're another time. We'll save it for another time. I understand the point you're making.
But I'm just, okay, I'm like, a lot of the Hawks' inconsistency starts here in your forward room, where it's like, we could talk about trading DeJounte Fit. Like, it didn't work. They have their issues. But their losing margins came from those two being the guys who ate up most of your forward minutes. Or if one of them got hurt, if two of them if Jaylen and another one and Saddiq or Hunter got hurt, they had no forward depth. Like it, so they ran a team with 3 forwards on the entire season, and anytime there was injuries, they were just completely uncompetitive. So it's like, okay, so this is a team that hasn't paid the tax, who's cut good players for nothing, is a shallow team that had a lot of injuries, and that's why they only won 36 games on the season. You know, and like they probably topped out as a 500 team at best this past year, like overall, if you account for everything. If they have reasonable good health, they ended up having bad health. You know, and you're like, well, how are they going to advance the franchise forward? Well, getting that lottery pick helps a lot because Alex Sarr, like, that's a big dude. Like you can't teach size, and the Hawks have, Brad, I don't think the Hawks have had a 7-footer who plays rotation, like serious rotation minutes. Has it been since Dikembe?
I mean, Alex Len.
Alex Len. Yep. Alex Len.
But Alex Len was obviously a fringe. I mean, he was okay, but you know what I mean? He was not like a core piece.
Yeah.
So, but yes, it's been a while for sure since they've had like a full-time anchor. Because I mean, they've had really, really good center play at times. Capella's prime, Horford, all those guys. But those guys are 6'10", 6'9", and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. So, but to get back on the shine the light, would be like, okay, the next thing people are going to do is like, all right, what's changed from that Eastern Conference Finals team to now beyond just John Collins, Kevin Huerter not be on the roster anymore? Well, Gallinari is not on the roster anymore. Lou Williams retired. He's not on the roster anymore, and Capella's regressed. But I kind of want to really dig into what they were doing during that run where it was Trae Young surrounded by a bunch of shooting or guys who were pure defenders who didn't need the ball to score, like Tony Sell and Solomon Hill in the second half of that season when they went on their run, when they've had the best stretch of like winning in the in this Hawks reign, where they only lost like 11 games in the second half of the season. Like they were a legitimate, great team that year, but they were great in similar ways that the Knicks are great, are a good team right now. Are the Knicks a traditional quote unquote title contender? No, but like you surround Jalen Brunson with shooting, size, playmaking, like, and you allow your elite guy to just run their offense while you hide them on defense with bigger, basketball players. Like that's a winning formula. After that Eastern Conference Finals run, to me, I feel like the biggest misgivings of this organization, they didn't know why they were winning. They didn't know why they were winning. So they were like, okay, what if we plug in DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish to this team? But like almost immediately, Brad, those two guys for worse, just like, DeAndre needs the ball in his hands, but he's not a good offensive player, but he needs the ball. Like that's his.
People do forget, just to your point, people do forget that they weren't playing.
They were not playing.
They were hurt. And it wasn't like, Hunter has always, to this point, been an entrenched starter on this team, but he was hurt. And they'd already done the trade for him. They already did all this. I mean, that was 2 years before. Like they'd already invested so heavily. Put Cam's another issue because Cam was never good. Unfortunately, he just wasn't. But Hunter, they obviously had committed to. He was playing a ton of minutes, but he was hurt, and they were kind of forced. To your point, they were forced to do what you said, and they were playing a lot of Herter and Bogey. And defensively, it's like that's a little bit scary.
But they had John Collins and Clint Capella behind them.
Yep.
So you had shooting and you had defense on the back end, and like that worked for the Hawks. But they, when they needed defense, they'd bring somebody like a Solomon Hill who doesn't need usage on the ball, doesn't need the ball to be effective. You have Gallinari who has size coming off the bench plus shooting, an element the Hawks have not been able to replace since letting him go as well. So it's just like they also changed their offense. We've talked about this before. If you want to know more, you're probably going to want to go back. But like Nate McMillan changed the offense from what worked to like double drag just stopped being ran.
Well, that's something I know Glenn talked about a lot too. Like, and people have forgotten that too. The year that Nate took over and he had the previous assistant staff, and they were run. It was you could argue it was the best of both worlds. You had the veteran head coach who was the steady hand, and he just kept the train on the tracks. And you had Lloyd's system and Lloyd's assistants, and Melvin Hunt kind of being the architect of all that stuff. And I'm partially Melvin's a guy I like a lot, but as soon as you overhaul that staff, it's not anything having to do with the next guys who came in. It's just that it became Nate ball, and pure Nate ball didn't work for the roster. It just didn't.
The roster didn't fit, and also it was like we're force feeding usage and touches into DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish, whereas guys like Kevin Huerter was getting DNPs to begin the year, like perfectly healthy. Guy won a game 7, and they were just like, "Well, nah, you're not playing tonight, Kevin." Dylan Wright was racking up DNPs. Lou Williams and Gallinari got hurt by the new rule changes, and they just weren't as effective as they used to be. But like, it was just so much like roster. Like Schlenk was building a roster, and Nate McMillan was wanting to do something else. And like there was a strong disconnect that had basically been in place until the Hawks hired Quinn. So for like a year and a half, like there was just a strong disconnect between management and what they wanted, how the Hawks wanted to play, and the coaching staff. Like and it was just, there just wasn't any organization direction, and that's how you get to here, where you're constantly inconsistent. Why are we inconsistent? Because the roster doesn't work. We still have these guys who need the ball, but when you have Trae Young who forces Trae Young who, like, for the better, is a high usage player that forces everybody around him to play optimally. But we got these guys who want to do their own thing, separate from what offensively at least what Trae wants to do. And then you look at it where it's like, okay, so we're doing that, but we got DeJounte, I think Wesley Morton put it great on his blog on Peachtree Hoops, where he talked about it's two small guards, 2 guards under 180 pounds.
Yeah.
Nobody else in the NBA is doing this.
Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp, and we all carry around things that are creating stress for us, whether it's big or small. When we keep things bottled up and start affecting us in a negative fashion, therapy is a safe space to get things off our chest, also figure out how to work through whatever happens to be weighing you down in that moment. Therapy is helpful for everybody. You can learn positive coping skills and how to set better boundaries. Therapy also empowers you to be the best version of yourself, and not just for people who have gone through major trauma. I know I have my own stresses when it comes to work and the future of my life, etc., and we can all benefit from getting things off of our chest with folks at BetterHelp. If you're thinking about starting therapy at all, give BetterHelp a try right now. It's entirely online, and BetterHelp is designed to be convenient and flexible for you. It's even designed to suit your schedule, which is huge if you're not getting a time crunch like I often am. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Get it off your chest right now with the folks at BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. The place to go is BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. It's occasionally simple. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not that DeJounte's really good, and we don't have to do that whole thing. But yeah, the overall point, so we don't spend too much time on it, but it's like it's the lack of an organizational direction that they've picked and stuck to. I know Glenn has said that a million times, our mutual friend Glenn Willis, but it's true. It shines through, and sometimes we get lost in that. And people like us follow the team every single day, and it's like not the number one topic, but occasionally you got to take a step back and be like, all right, what is the plan? And it was maybe accented the most in recent memory by the whole DeJounte thing. We would have to relitigate that, but organizationally, the guy who was the president of basketball operations got overruled on the biggest trade they've made in a long time, and that doesn't make sense. Like, that shouldn't happen. And that doesn't mean that he was perfect, because he wasn't. But like that happened, and then that leads to this period now where like they have this front office that, look, they got lots more people in the front office, but they're green. This is a new front office. They haven't really done much. And I don't mean necessarily mean that as a negative. Like, the tax cutting stuff is ownership driven. It's not front office driven. I've made plenty of fun of that, but they just haven't put their stamp on this team since the DeJounte thing was the last big move they made. Everything they've done some stuff on the margin since then that was okay, but it's just been cost cutting, and they made one kind of buy move on Sadiq Bey, but even that was kind of a cheap. We just got to add a forward guy, and they did it in a way to save money. And that's fine. So this is the first time. They could have done it last summer. They just didn't. But this is the first summer where it's like everybody kind of knows the deal that like they got to make a more significant change. And this is pre-winning the lottery. Now you throw that in there too. But everyone knows. I mean, on the last show that I recorded before we were talking now, I spent the open talking about like, well, we still opened the last segment about how everyone in the league basically believes that they're going to do something at point guard. And we don't have to do that whole thing again. You and I have talked about this before. We won't do that actively today. But it's like, that's the big move, because it involves two famous basketball players who play the same position. But that ain't the only move. Like, they got other stuff that they probably got to do and clean out the books and all these things, and now you got the number one pick. So long story short, it's an organizational direction thing. Do they want to win now? Do I push your chips in? I'm sure you've heard this, and I've had questions too. Like, what are the chances that they trade the number one pick for someone that can help them now? That's a whole talking point that's happening on the internet. I don't know how real that's going to be. We don't know. Landry didn't answer it, which is his right. So it's all these things put into one, when the real outcome is, what do you want to be? Like, what do you want to build? Like, what is the point? It doesn't mean it's going to work, but I would find it very refreshing if they were to clearly, in what they do transactionally, point to a vision of what the roster was supposed to look like. Because Hawks DNA and all that stuff is great. Like, you could say all those things that you want to do, but I believe that they actually want to bring in guys who fit their character profile, and they talk about it all the time. Landry is he just says the corporate speak stuff all the time. I don't blame him. But basketball wise, like, we made fun of Travis Schlenk and the dribble pass shoot stuff for a long time, right? We made fun of it. It was funny, but he actually believed it, and he built the roster that way.
And he built the roster around it. Yep.
What is that for this new group? Hawks DNA is whatever it is, but like, how do you want to play? And that goes into the trade DeJounte choice. It goes into who you pick at number one, because look, this is a flawed draft, but whoever they take at number one, you would presume is going to fit what they want to do long term. You can learn a lot. Like, if they draft Alex Sarr, it might be that they just believe Alex Sarr is the best player. It might be that simple, but it also might be that, hey, we like what this guy can do for us on defense in particular. Like, we're going to build our defense around this guy long term. That would be interesting for us to note, to be like, all right, this is what they want him to do, want him to be. And we're going to have to learn what they actually want to do with him, because maybe he's a 4, maybe he's a 5. But it would tell you something about what they actually want to do, that they invested the number one overall pick in a 7'1", 7'4" wingspan big man who can play out on the court, and not just a drop big. Like, he's going to be that's a guy who can play everywhere. I mean, not be him, but it's
big.
I would just like to learn. I want more info, Tyler. That's all I want.
Yeah, and let's tackle the one thing where could the Hawks trade the pick for a player? The issue with that, well, as of May,
name that player.
Name the player that's available, who's worth a number one pick.
I will throw out. There is literally it's all nonsense right now. It's too early to know. I have heard one name that is even like tangentially reasonable to me. I'm not saying I would do it. There's one player I've heard. I wonder if you could guess it, but I won't make you guess it. That I've seen, and it's Lauri Markkanen.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying I would do that. Lauri's got 1 year left on his deal. There's stuff that you have to navigate all that, and I don't think he's that. I mean, he's a fringe star level player. He's a top 40 player in the league, something like that.
Yeah,
he's a really good player. He isn't a number one on a title team or anything like that. He's a good player, but he is the combination of age, skill set. He's not 35. So I don't know. I don't remember who floated. Somebody floated Paul George, and I was like, you don't trade and one pick for 35-year-old Paul George. Like Paul George is great. If he was 25, sure, yeah, that's reasonable. But I know this draft is not great. I know it's not at the top. You still don't trade the number 1 overall pick in the draft for a non-premium asset, and that's corporate speak. But you know what I mean? Like you don't trade the number 1 overall pick for the 60th best player in the NBA. That's just not that's not the way that works. I mean, maybe they would, but I don't see that happening. And also you're talking about, there's also all the money concerns. Like you got to match salary on whatever trade, all that stuff's secondary. It's like, but you don't organizationally, honestly, this is not even the best way to think about this, but it's true. You don't want to be the team that trades the number 1 overall pick for a supporting player. Like the optics of that are hard to get over. I mean, your fan base will be furious. You know what I mean? Like it's got to be splashy if you do that. In the actual real world, can you imagine? You're a Hawks fan. You're a Hawks. Can you imagine the reaction in the city of Atlanta if they traded the number 1 overall pick for like a pretty good player? Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a name. Like even if it's let's say it's Markkanen, who I just argue makes some sense. No one would like that. You know what I mean? I shouldn't say no one, but that would not be well received.
But it would be a tough sell because Lauri, what he's done in Utah, he's been really good.
He is,
but like he's been really good in a pure play finisher role. Like he's not a creator for himself or other. He's a pure like.
I just remember the other name.
Go ahead.
Jaylen Brown. If Boston loses, if Boston doesn't win the championship, only because of its local connection, all that stuff, and he's a star. He's not a superstar. He's a star level player. I wouldn't be interested in doing that and paying him $60 million a year. But that's another name that I heard. But that's the kind of name that you would think about. But those guys are between 25 and 45.
Reality is like the Suns are not trading Devin Booker for the number 1 overall pick.
No, they're not. They're not.
The Cavs aren't trading Donovan Mitchell to the Hawks for the number 1 pick in this draft. Even though Donovan, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I don't even know if the Hawks would want to do that considering trading Donovan.
You wouldn't. But there is not a top 20 player in the league
exactly
that I think the Hawks would do, because the only way that you could get I'm making a thumbs up. Only way you could get a player as good as they would be is if the guy was old.
Yep.
And let's say Kevin Durant, right? Let's just say the word Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant at 35, you don't trade the number 1 overall pick in the draft for Kevin Durant at 35. Because if you're going to do that, you better win the title, or at least be like a title contender, like right there.
And this Hawks team, if they swapped out that number 1 pick for Kevin Durant, isn't a title contender as currently constructed, considering the salary they're going to have to give up.
Well, that's the thing. You got to even make the deal work. Anyway, we won't do the whole deal.
We don't want to get into the weeds, but
it's got to be DeJounte as matching salary, or Hunter and Capella, or whatever it's going to be. Anyway. We'll leave it there for now. But like that's the kind of thing where you almost have to go a rung down. Like, and people might wish cast young guys who were like top 5 picks in the last couple years, but look, the Magic are not trading Paolo Banchero for the number 1 overall pick. You know what I mean? It's like
I floated
number 1 pick.
I floated Cade Cunningham, and I'm like, the Pistons are not trading.
They're not going to do
the light of their life. Like
no,
the
they're
only
not
good thing they've done in 20 years was draft Cade Cunningham.
Before you even debate whether the Hawks would want to do that, you're right. The Pistons wouldn't do that.
No. Politically, they'd get killed for doing that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So guys that might be interesting for the Hawks politically wouldn't work for other teams. And then you get into guys that I would argue, shouldn't go after the old guys. Like the ultimate one is so funny was like, there was a local radio host that was pitching a pathway to LeBron. And it's like, guys, you don't do that for LeBron. Like you're not trying to do anyway. So
LeBron is turning 40 pretty soon. Like
I think to shift gears a little bit, I think if they just didn't love the options, number one, let's just say in this hypothetical scenario, they have a board that has a tier of guys at the top and there's not anybody separate on the Hawks board, which by the way, I know everybody loves Sarr. We'll talk about him in a second. That would be a reasonable opinion to have, I think, of this draft class, to be like, look, we don't love anybody at the top. Guys we like, we don't love anybody. I do think there is a plausible way to trade the pick, move down the board a little, and get a lot of stuff to move down the board. And still end up with a top 5-6 pick to make your pick and get whatever else attached. That's plausible to me. But the whole like theory of let's turn the number 1 overall pick into a star, like a ready-made star. Yeah, if you want to trade number 1 and DeJounte Murray for a star, maybe that would work. But the problem is, especially in this draft with the way it's viewed around the league, teams that have stars are trying to win. And the number 1 pick doesn't do anything for them right now. Like
the number 1 pick does nothing for other teams because guess what? Those teams that have stars that are at a level above the Hawks right now have better rosters. They're trying to win. They're trying to add. The Pelicans are not trading Brandon Ingram to just trade him like the Hawks did with John Collins. They're trying to add pieces to help them win and push into the top 4 in the Western Conference. Like, we can talk about Ingram in a second, but like just in general, like the stars that would elevate the Hawks to where they need to be just aren't available as of right now. Things could change. Things could change. Somebody could be like, I want out and I want to be traded. We don't know. Like,
it's always the domino. But speaking of, I want to talk about Sarr. We're gonna run out. We won't talk about everybody. You have to come back. But we laid the groundwork there. But it's a big summer. They have big decisions to make. I think that there are pathways to trade the pick. I think certainly the smart money would be on them not trading the pick because that's just the way this works. I think the number 1 overall pick's been traded like twice in my entire life. Yeah, it got traded. Chris Webber got traded for Penny in that swap, and then the Markelle Fultz Jason Tatum trade happened, and that's literally it. I believe that's it for my entire lifetime, and I'm not that young, so like it's rare that it happens. I think it's more likely this year than it usually is, but that doesn't mean that it's likely at all. All right, that is all for part 1 with myself and Tyler Jones. Please stay tuned for part 2 on your podcast platform of choice, and please subscribe to this podcast on Apple or Spotify or Overcast. We're also on YouTube on the video side. Please leave ratings and reviews in positive fashion to help us spread the word. And please tell your friends about the podcast as well. You can be followed on Twitter at LockedOnHawks. Follow me as well if you'd like to on my individual account at BT Rowland. You can also follow my written work and some extra audio musings on the Braves and Hawks, etc. at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay tuned for part 2, and we'll see you all next time.